Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to episode 23 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. This week's episode is brought to you by Church Revitalization University, an online course that helps your church experience healthy, sustainable growth. Every church deserves to win at reaching your community for Christ and maturing more disciples. The course walks you step by step through the strategic envisioning process developed by Dr. Aubrey Malfers that has successfully helped churches grow for over 20 years. Registration is open right now through February 1st. Visit churchrevitalizationuniversity.com to watch a sample video and download the free ebook, Preparing Your Church for Revitalization. Now, in this week's episode, AJ and I share with you what a revitalized church looks like. Using Ezekiel 37 as a framework, we're going to detail for you the four main outcomes of a revitalized church. To read today's show notes and to share this episode with your friends in ministry, visit malfersgroup.com/23, malfersgroup.com/23. Now, let's dive in.
Okay, and welcome to episode 23 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. This week, we're talking about the other side of revitalization, the revitalized church, awakening the congregation, new life and anticipation and excitement, and just moving beyond, I'll go ahead and give it away here, Scott. Moving beyond the valley of the dry bones. We're just going to kind of walk through Ezekiel chapter 37 for a little bit this episode, because I think it's going to be encouraging to our listeners, especially for those considering a revitalization process, because there is hope and there can be anticipation of a brighter future on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, I think we often spend so much time talking about, and rightly so. I mean, I think people tune into this podcast hoping to get some advice on how to go through revitalization. And so I think the vast majority of our audience is sort of pre-revitalization or during revitalization. But I do think it's worth sort of talking about what does it look like? What does a revitalized church look like? What do you have to look forward to? Just love Ezekiel 37, Valley of Dry Bones. And I want to encourage you. You might be thinking that you already know this passage really well, and I'm sure you've heard it. You may have preached a sermon on it. But there are elements here that I don't want you to miss, especially if you've never thought about it through the lens of revitalization and the church in general, and not just sort of on that personal level. So I'm looking forward to this episode, AJ, and encouraging pastors on what is on the other side of revitalization.
Yeah, so to get us started, let me just kind of throw this first point out, and I want to read this first passage, and then we'll just talk through it, Scott.
That sounds great.
So we're talking about revitalization and or bringing structure back into the church for revitalization. And Ezekiel 37 verses 7 and 8 speak to this. Listen to what this passage says. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I prophesied, there was a sound, and behold, a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to its bone. And I looked, and behold, there were sinews on them, and flesh had come upon them, and skin had covered them, but there was no breath in them. So we have a structure coming together, the framework, the skeleton, coming back together after being scattered and dry and dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is really a lot like what a revitalization process is. I would I think it's a really great analogy actually for what it's like when we're working with a church, one-on-one or through Church Revitalization University. However you're partnering with us, it is almost like controlled chaos. This idea of the bones rattling and they're coming back together, and there's almost some confusion. Now, which bone connects to the knee bone? And it's all kind of coming together. And then the sinews, it begins to really take shape, especially by the time you get to that vision session and the strategy session. Things start to really come together, and you really start to get a picture of what this thing is supposed to be, AJ. Mm-hmm. And yet, I love at the end of that verse, it says, there was no breath in them. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to remember, like, you can go through all the process, you can get all the structure together, you can pull all the pieces together, and it can really start to look like something, but there's still no breath in it. So the first step is this coming together, this putting the structure. I mean, if there was breath in the bones, that would be like, I guess, a zombie type, undead type situation. So,
Yes.
so this part of the process is not unimportant, bringing the bones together and putting the sinew
That's
on it,
right.
but it's not the whole thing.
And the right bone's next to the right bone. The foot bone connects to the leg bone, not the neck bone. So, I
Right,
mean,
right.
we've got to bring all the bones together in the right order for the right function as life then begins to come into place. That's the necessity of structure and an
Mhm.
understanding of what pieces need to work with the other pieces next to them. So, it is a great analogy. It's a great picture.
So let me read this next verse, AJ, and
Okay.
then and let's talk about this. So the first one is revitalization brings structure. So a revitalized church has the structure, and we've got the bones and the sinews and all that's come together. The second point here, AJ, is revitalization brings a living purpose. Ezekiel 37:10 says, "So I prophesied as the Lord commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they lived and stood on their feet." I love this, an exceedingly great army.
Hmm. Wow.
Let's talk about this a little bit. Like, there's so much in this one verse, but um, there's a living purpose to this group.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and it is it's an exceedingly great army. You may not feel that way right now about your church, that even if life comes into us, we are not an exceedingly great army. But I'm here to tell you that you are, regardless of your numbers. But the
Mhm.
Lord can also see and have a vision for you much greater than you are today. And so once life does come into you, your purpose may be to be an exceedingly great army, but also the Lord looks beyond you, and into His church, from the origins of the four winds that this breath came from. I mean, your church is much greater than maybe who shows up on Sunday morning, because your reach can be that much greater. But yeah, this breath coming into them, and then having a purpose,
Mhm.
is powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it very easily could just say that the breath came into them and they lived and they stood on their feet in exceedingly great multitude, and just spoke to the vastness of the size or the number of people or whatever. But it doesn't say that. It says an exceedingly great army. And
And words
I want
matter.
to, yeah, they matter a lot. And I want to say this to pastors who are going through revitalization. Once you get on the other side of this revitalization process and your church is alive again, you don't live then without any risk.
Hmm.
It's an exceedingly great army. This pile of bones lives to potentially die again, to go into battle, to risk their lives
Risk.
again. And so I think the misnomer in this, AJ, is that so if we go through a revitalization process, on the other side is sunshine and lollipops, and
Hmm.
there's no adversity on that. That's not the case. The church is revitalized and revived and stands up again, and it stands up as an army, as a group that's going into battle, that it could die again, like it's at risk.
Hmm.
And that's part of life. Risk is part of living. And I don't think we should miss that. But they have a
Yeah.
living purpose. They've been told what they are. They're an army. They're
Hmm.
not just a multitude. They're not just a group of people. They've been raised to life so that they have a purpose to serve as an army. And if God is going to bring breath back into your church, and it is a divine thing, I think is the other thing worth mentioning. Like, we can pull the pieces together, but God brings the breath. And if
Hmm.
He's going to breathe life into your church, AJ, it's going to be for a purpose. He is not going to give you life again so you can go back to coasting.
That's right.
It's
That's
to
right.
go into battle.
That's exactly right. That's why army is used here, because there is a fight still to be fought.
Mhm.
We haven't reached the end. When the Lord returns, the army will be retired. But until then, the army is here to fight. And so, yes, the vision for your church is not that you will rebuild your army for a vacation.
Right.
You're rebuilding the army to take risks and to
Yeah.
be out in the world, fighting against what needs to be fought. And so, man, such a great passage.
Let's go to the next verse here. So point number 3 here. So number 1 is revitalization brings structure. Point 2, revitalization brings a living purpose. You're alive for a purpose. Point 3 here, revitalization brings hope. A revitalized church is a hopeful church. Ezekiel 37, 11 through 13 says, "Then the Lord said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is lost. We are indeed cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I will open your graves and raise you from your graves, O my people, and I will bring you into the land of Israel, and you shall know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and raise you from your graves, O my people."
Mm,
AJ, I hear this in churches a lot, whether they say it outright or you just kind of catch it in their tone. This our feeling of we're cut off, our hope is lost,
yeah.
and that is not God's heart for you as church.
Yeah. I mean, I was about to say, doesn't this sound like the phone calls, and meetings that we have with pastors all the time? Our bones
Every
are
week.
dried up. Our hope is lost. I don't have one cell in my body equal to Ezekiel, but I love speaking hope into churches.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, it's not that we have a miracle process that makes this happen. The breath of the Lord is the one that does the revitalization and the new life.
Yeah.
But there is hope out there. And I mean, just as the Lord, had Ezekiel prophesy to the dry bones in the valley, he still is speaking to dry bones today in churches all throughout the United States and around the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're blessed to be able to help, vocalize that hope. And in the end, it's not us, it's not you as the pastor. I mean, it is the Lord that does the work, but his word gives us the hope. And I love being able to speak that hope.
Yeah. I mean, twice in this passage, he reminds them that you are my people, you are my people, you are my people. And are you, pastor, listening to this in your congregation? Are you any less God's people than the Israel referenced
Mm,
in Ezekiel 37? And if God would raise up Israel, will he not raise you up?
mm,
You're his people. This is his promise to you that he wants to bring life to dry things. This is the business that God is in. It is his chief business, starting from Genesis, right? Is to take dead things, dust, to form them together and then to breathe life into it. I mean,
mm-hmm,
this is job number 1 of the Lord God, is to take dead things and bring them to life. We see this in Genesis. We see this in the death and resurrection of Jesus, and we see it in the death and the resurrection of your church. So don't feel like because things are dying or dead that all hope is lost. When we believe in and serve a God whose chief business, number 1, is raising dead things to life.
mm-hmm.
And you've really got to believe and lean into that hope. Not in a sort of again, I feel like we've talked about this before, not in sort of a name it, claim it kind of thing, but in trusting in the character and person of God. This is who he is and what he does.
Yeah.
Not because we deserve it, but because of who he is and his
Yeah.
character.
If you still have a remnant committed to the things of God, then as he said, where you're gathered, he's there with you. And and yeah, so a church regaining its purpose and living on mission has hope.
Absolutely.
All right. Our next one here, Scott, we're going to move finally now into Ezekiel 37:14, and we're talking about revitalization bringing revival. So, yeah, in this passage, we hear, and I will put my spirit within you, and you shall live, and I will place you in your own land. Then you shall know that I am the Lord. I have spoken, and I will do it, declares the Lord. Those are important
Man.
eyes in there.
Yeah. It's not you'll do it. You'll get it together. You'll figure it out. It's I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do it, and you'll know that I am the Lord. And listen, I was reminded by some friends in ministry just a couple of weeks ago that um, the concept of revival, like I often kind of think of revival as people who um, aren't Christians coming to faith, like at a revival meeting, for example. But the real concept of revival is about taking things, people who have sort of been deactivated and reactivating them so that they are revived. And that's what revitalization is about too. It's this idea of taking things that are kind of stopped being effective and making them effective again. And this is the promise of God, that he's something that he is going to do. And I think the biggest enemy, AJ, that I see in churches is apathy.
Yeah.
Just not caring. I mean, we see this all the time. And I don't know, I might edit this out later, AJ, depending on how I feel on how this comes across. But we have this incredible process. I mean, we hear complaints all the time. My church will never afford to work with an outside group. Our church will never pay to bring somebody in or whatever. And I get that. We heard that. And our response to that is the development of Church Revitalization University.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly affordable. It's $499 to walk you all the way through the revitalization process that we use with churches one-on-one. Obviously, there's real benefits to working with someone on site. But if you're like, my church is never going to do that, this is a way to do that at a really, at a price that anybody could afford to do it if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And churches are taking advantage of this, but not nearly enough. Apathy is the biggest challenge. Church is saying, I can't, you know what? Price isn't the problem. Money is not the barrier between you and being revitalized. It's apathy.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And that's been our vision for years. Make money not be a barrier. And we've done it.
Right.
We've kind of achieved that goal. And now it's up to you to make the decision that you want to be different. And it takes that. It takes the leadership of churches saying, we're not happy where we are. We think there's something better. So yeah, if you want to make that decision, then we're ready to walk alongside you.
That's it. And we want this episode, the goal of this episode is to encourage you in what's on the other side of revitalization. But I do want to take just a hot second and call you out. If you've just been sitting on your hands waiting to do something, now's the time. And I'm not saying this to make a buck. Listen, at $4.99, we're not making money on Church Revitalization University. We made this to serve you. And if you've been sitting on your hands, now's the time to get off your hands and to really engage in a process. And yeah, it's only part one of this episode, getting the bones together and the sinews. And the rest of this is really a spiritual process of the Lord breathing his breath on your church and all of that. But it starts with getting the bones together and get the sinews together. And I just want to encourage you. You have till February 1st. That's it. So if you're listening to this past February 1st, then hopefully you can catch us for the fall enrollment. But if you're listening to this as it's released, go online, and there's no reason to wait. Go to churchrevitalizationuniversity.com and sign up for that. And listen, you might be saying, well, I'm sitting on my hands because I don't have my team together. You have a whole year to do it. So there's not a rush to get started on the process, but you do have a window closing soon on when you can enroll. So, AJ, I'm not saying this, hopefully it doesn't come across as a sales pitch. It's not. I just want us to serve as many churches as possible. I feel very passionate about that.
Yeah.
It's why we get up in the morning. It's why we do what we do. And we know that this helps. This works.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're both completely excited about the opportunity, and what it's going to do. So yeah, so I hope you'll make that decision. You, pastor, leader, encourager, wherever you find yourself, in your church, then I hope you'll make that decision, because we want to see that for you. We want to see the great effect that your church is going to have on, internally and even more importantly, externally, and how it'll affect your community, your Jerusalem, your Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, because you can have a vision that big. The Lord has given that to you. That is available to you.
Okay, but AJ, yeah, before we wrap up, let's just walk through again. What does an awakened church look like? Can you walk us through these? What are these four components, these four things that we see in Ezekiel 37? And honestly, the four things that we see in the churches that we work with that successfully go through this process. It's such a joy. It's the joy of our work, really, to see churches come through the other side of this. So walk us briefly through those four things one more time.
Yeah. First of all, having a structure in place. It's important. You've got to start with a framework. You got to start with a healthy framework so that as you move, through life as a church, you have the things in place to help you make the best decisions for everything that comes at you. Structure. Yeah. Second, living on purpose, knowing that there's a purpose for your church, that there is still a great purpose, that you can be a force to be reckoned with against a very real enemy. And so you have to be ready to fight the good fight and to take the risks that you need to live that purpose out. Thirdly, hope. It's a powerful, powerful emotion and understanding that hope exists for a reason, because the Lord provides it, and the Lord has promises that He wants to be able to live out through you. So revitalization definitely brings hope. I know we get excited about that, Scott. Yeah. And then finally, revitalization brings revival. I always want to say new life. It's returning life. New life will happen through the Holy Spirit as you bring the name of the Lord to people that don't know that name. But for you today, we're talking about returning life, breathing breath back into those dry bones. And so, yeah, these are four great pieces that we see out of Ezekiel 37.
Man, it just reminds me of that last piece, AJ, too. I was thinking of two conversations that I had in the last week or so, both with churches that the Malfers Group's worked with in the past. One is a church that we're actually probably going to be working with later a second time this summer to do some deeper work with them. And they're talking about how the vision work that they did a handful of years ago, man, they're people, not the leaders, the pastors, but like the people in the church continue to use that language that they developed again and again. And it's been, I guess, like 8 years since they went through the process, and they're blowing and going, and they're still using that. And I just love that idea of this revived church where the people aren't sitting on the sidelines. They're really activated, which reminds me of the other church that I was talking to here recently, a church that I worked with in Florida that we went through the process with them. And the pastor I was speaking with, he was telling me how just the DNA of the church is just different. The people are not sitting waiting for somebody else to do something, but they are sort of activated as missionaries, and they're moving and doing things. And before they were sort of pew sitters, and now they're really out there and leaning in and getting stuff done. And I love hearing those stories. Like, that's revival, is seeing people getting to work.
That's right.
And really owning it. And just imagine, Pastor, if you're the one kind of having to carry that load and carry the mission and carry the vision, to have a whole army of people who are carrying that with you, just how powerful that can be. And I love seeing that. And I love that part of our job, AJ. It's wonderful.
It is indeed. All right. Well, we thank you for joining us this week on episode 23 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. You can read this week's article and hear the podcast again, be able to share it from malfersgroup.com/23. malfersgroup.com/23 gets you to the show notes, the article, and a way that you can share this with other ministry leaders. We'd love for you to do that. Because our heart is to see a revitalized church. And so we want to make sure that this is available to as many church leaders as possible. We're thankful for you. We pray blessings over your ministry, and we're looking forward to having you back again next week.